Tonight we're here to talk about public transit in Boston. We have a distinguished panel here that will be moderated by my Professor Jinhua Zhao. He's the Professor of Cities and Transportation at MIT, and he's the founder of the MIT Mobility Initiative, coalescing the Institute's efforts on transportation research, education, entrepreneurship, and engagement. He hosts the MIT Mobility Forum, which highlights transportation innovation from MIT and across the globe. He also directs the JTL Urban Mobility Lab and Transit Lab, leading long-term collaboration with transportation authorities, operators worldwide, enabling cross-cultural learning between cities in North America, Asia, and Europe. He leads the program Mens, Manus, and Machina, M3S, How AI Impacts the Future of Work and the Future of Learning, at the Singapore MIT Alliance for Research and Technology. For those keeping track at home, that does, in fact, have the acronym SMART. Also the co-founder and chief scientist for Tram.Global, mobility decarbonization venture, and in general, bringing behavioral science and transportation technology together to shape travel behavior, design mobility systems, and reform urban policies. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Professor Zhao to introduce the other members of our panel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan. I really appreciate you coming the Friday difficult rainy day here. How many come here by team? Wow, it's amazing, right audience for the public. Really proud of this, yeah. How many use the team at least once in the last 7 days? Most of you. That's great. Yeah. My task tonight, I'm the moderator, only 2 tasks, right? The first one is to introduce Jim and Fred. For that, I assume all of you probably know Fred and Jim, so my job's done. The second one is mostly to get excited and ask questions. Right. So I'll start with 3 questions before I pass to introduce Jim and Fred and have our conversation. First of all, I want to say that if we name 2 most important agenda of U.S. society today, what would you name? 2 most important agenda. You can yell out. What would you say about it? Climate change? Economy. Border. Housing? Any others? Education. Inequality. Right. You see, I would say that if we name 2, climate change and social equality, right, that's the agenda of U.S. society today. And one would argue that public transit contributes to both by its design. Right. But somehow, we couldn't make a case for it in the United States. We failed to defend it, and we failed to deliver it. Right. So that's the thing we're trying to cover. Right. Here, for a long time, I thought I'm a professor. As a professor, my job is to offer social critique. Right? This is wrong, somebody should do this, etc. Right? But for a while, I recognized that if we keep doing this bashing the team, it's no longer useful. Right? So instead of asking the question, how can MIT do something to really help? So beyond criticism, any solution we can offer, right? Any insight we can offer. We thought that no better way than having Jim and Fred join us and share with us their insights. And by the way, let's do that. How do you actually work with Jim or Fred or study Jim and Fred? Right. It's quite more than actually about half. Right. So basically, just in one word to summarize this is I'm sitting with 2 legends in transportation in the United States. So it's really an honor to be here. For that, I would add that besides being a statesman, I also appreciate the 2 as educators, right? That's the time I start to interact with you. I personally see the 2 as my mentor. I really appreciate this. For whoever, being a student or colleague, I think you see the fortune that having the 2 people, right? So that's my introduction. And for the specifics, we'll probably take a whole night to read their contributions, etc. I'll leave that for overview. All right. Also, I want to thank a few organizations for helping tonight. One is, of course, the MIT alum of Boston, Megan, and other colleagues. The School of Architecture Planning. I see Nick and Mel here for contributing to this. Thank you, Nick and Mel. Also, MIT Mobility Initiative, as Zhao and Lubang here helping organize this. Let me say a few words about MIT Mobility Initiative. We founded it 3 years ago, right? So why do we do that? So MIT has been brilliant in the transportation history. Yeah, many professors, students contribute both to research, practice, playing a significant role across the industry and community. But if I offer one criticism to MIT's own transportation situation, is that each of us are doing brilliant things, but there's no coherency whatsoever. Right? If you come to MIT looking at transportation, there are 50 different organizations, labs, etc. Right? So that's why we founded MIT Mobility Initiative, to offer some degree of coherence. Right? But it's important here, we don't want to make it to be a rigid organization. We want to offer some degree of coherency without hurting the bottom-up approach. That's the MIT spirit. People do things without having approval, etc. Right? So that we do. But another thing, we also set up Mobility Initiative to be outward-facing organization. Right? Not just a bunch of professors talk to each other, but instead bring the communities, like you guys, bring the industry, bring the government officials, bring the foundations, whoever cares about transportation together, share the view. We'll find that much of the innovation in transportation come beyond what MIT can do. Right? That's a brief introduction. Thanks for asking this. So this the Mobility Initiative as part. So we're very glad to be one of the sponsors of tonight's events. All right. So let me describe today. We titled as a big dig, the T and the future of transit. Right? I'll say that we'll mostly focus on the T, given that's probably on your mind these days, and I can see a lot of let's say anglers about the T these days. Right? So we'll discuss big dig in the context of its connection to IDP, and also in the context that can we have the ambition doing something at the big scale about the T, for example. So that will ask this question toward the end with Fred and Jim on this. Right? All right, and then into the sequence, we'll start from a broader international perspective, then get to the US perspective, then get to the Boston context specific. So we go from international to US, and then to Boston. That's the sequence we'll do that. So first of all, to say that there's really important distinction between transit as a concept versus transit as an implementation. Right? I do argue that transit can be successful, both internationally, but also historically. Right? Internationally, have you been to, say, for example, London, UK? Right? You experience how good transit system can be. And this spring I was in Barcelona. In the summer I was in Tokyo. Right? Transit is brilliant. Right? My son was saying, oh, we rush into a station. Then he said, Dad, you shouldn't do that. The next one comes in 1.5 minutes. Right? So here, transit as concept can be powerful. In fact, almost all the great cities in the world have a great transit system. Also, I was chatting with friend Jim. Transit can be successful even in Boston. At least historically. Frankie told me, quote me a figure. That's really surprising. I need to have to collect the data on customer satisfaction. In 1991, can you guess what's the figure? Customer satisfaction. Yeah, well, how about let me ask you today? If you ask customer satisfaction in the T, how much would you guess? 20%?
The other 50%.
Yeah. But can you guess what was the number in 1991?
78.
90%. 90%. Any other guess?
9.
Yeah. Yeah. So in 1991, that's the time when Fred just completed his tenure as the secretary. That time, the customer satisfaction is 92%. The transit can be successful, even in our town. All right, that's all I have to say. Now let me pass to, start with the first question, Jim, on that, right? Jim actually at MIT organized MIT Transit Research Consortium, brought the biggest transit agency in the country together, right? So, Jim, can you tell us a little bit about what is this transit research about?
Sure.
And what do you find by interacting with it?
Our Transit Research Consortium, which we just started this year, by the way, this fellow running here, Bhuvan, has been instrumental. Instrumental is a modest word in helping us put this together. We provide research, workshops, and confidential sort of collaborative settings for the CTA in Chicago, WMATA, MTA in New York, Seattle, San Francisco, and LA Metro. And it's a pretty strong representative group of the largest agencies in the United States. And what I have found, and none of this will surprise you who pay attention to it, is just, yes, New York being New York is always a little different. But by and large, across the board, U.S. transit agencies are facing serious challenges these days. Now, some of those challenges have a lot to do with post-pandemic effects. Let's go. Thank you. And as I've worked with these agencies, I have sort of come up with this idea that there are sort of three converging sort of influences right now in this moment that are taking place that each agency has to deal with. One is what I call post-pandemic effects. And by that I mean a variety of things. But it really comes down to two things: ridership being down, and therefore fare revenue and revenue overall being down. As you know, or you may know, before the pandemic, on average, U.S. transit agencies depended for a third of their operating budget from fare revenue. So when your fares are down because your ridership is down, and then on average, again, in most places, ridership is at about 70% of pre-pandemic levels. Some places it's worse, some places it's better. There's a gap. And that gap has been funded by several of the COVID relief bills that Congress enacted over the past several years, but that money is about to expire. And so when you read in the newspapers that agencies are headed for a fiscal cliff, what that means is they're heading for a fiscal cliff on their operating budgets. So that's part of the pandemic effects. There are some lingering effects also where, if you look at surveys, riders still have safety fears. Some of them are COVID safety related, some of them are different. So we're dealing with that. We're also dealing at the same time with decarbonization of the transportation sector. And an essential element of dealing with climate change, a critical way to deal with carbon emissions. However, I think there are two issues I just want to raise really quickly. One is our rush to decarbonize is pushing transit agencies too quickly, in my opinion, to move toward electric bus technology at a time when they don't have the resources to do this, and at a time when they're resource strapped, and at a time where I believe that the technology still remains a little bit immature. And yet, you see legislative and municipal mandates set arbitrarily in Massachusetts, Seattle, elsewhere, San Francisco, that transit agencies must do this. In Massachusetts, the imperative is to move more quickly to electric bus than to electrify regional rail, even though electric multiple units, electric multiple locomotives, that's not immature technology. We could be gaining significant gains, both in service reliability, lower costs of maintenance, get rid of dirty diesel locomotives, but we're not doing that. The last thing I want to talk about is the convergence of those two things, post-pandemic effects and decarbonization. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing on decarbonization. For those of us who care about transit, many places, including our beloved Commonwealth of Massachusetts, continue to have a decarbonization plan for the transportation sector that puts most, if not all, of its eggs in the basket of shifting everyone to electric vehicles. And there's not a meaningful discussion of mode shift anywhere in any of the plans that currently govern how the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is dealing with this issue. I think it's a mistake of generational proportions that we don't address mode shift. And I just leave you with that. Finally, technology. What we have found in Jinhua's transit lab, for example, is that you can think about using technology to optimize a bad situation, where we've been working with Chicago, WMATA, and others on using technology to optimize bus routes when you have a smaller workforce. Not to use technology to displace a workforce, but to use technology to support a beleaguered smaller workforce in this post-pandemic environment. How to use technology to improve wrench time, which is the time that you actually have to work in a tunnel on a rail system overnight. How to model it so that you can squeeze out more time. And not do any of this at the expense of the workforce, but do this in a way that supports this smaller, beleaguered workforce. So think about those three factors, how they're converging, and how they play into the two things that Jinhua teased out, climate change and equity. I would say, really quickly, I'll end here. On the transit side, when I think about equity, and I think about poor transit delivery, particularly locally, and I think about technology and how it's often taking the place of giving people access, people who have the privilege of working from home, for example. What it's really putting at risk, in my judgment, is social cohesion. Because if you can stay at home all day long and not see anyone who doesn't look like you, that's not good for social cohesion, right? One thing that transit provides is it puts us in a place where we see people who don't look like us, and that's a good thing. And we're losing that on the altar of technology in this post-pandemic period.
Okay, so let me jump to an end point.
You have to speak
so
up some more,
I'm
Fred.
sure to say, in those logically sequence. I'm very hopeful about the MBTA in the future. Governor Healy's already committed to hiring the 2,000 employees that were short at the MBTA right now. And you can't get blood out of stone. You're not going to get decent, frequent transit service if you don't have the workers to run the system. And the anecdote that Jinhua mentioned about, why run? Because another train's going to come in 2 minutes. That's true in London. It ought to be true in Boston, but you can't do it without hiring more employees. So the governor's put in place one of the building blocks. They've recruited Phil Eng to be the general manager. I'm very hopeful. He comes with a very good reputation out of the Long Island Railroad in New York. So I'm hopeful that the terrible problems we're reading about in the Globe are going to get dealt with. And the chairman of the board recruited by Governor Healy is Tom Glynn. Tom Glynn was the general manager of the MBTA in 1992 when customer satisfaction reached 92%. We're not going to get to 92% next week, but I think there are promising signs that the governor's taking this seriously and putting people in place to make progress on a very important issue. I also, in the interest of saying things so I don't forget them, I specialize in stealing other people's ideas, trying to get them to move. And there's one guy here whose ideas I'd love to steal, and his name is Antonio Gamaro, sitting over here, hiding his face. I'll get to a few of his ideas, but admitting at the front end, these are ideas I'm stealing and trying to put into play. I also want to recognize Glenn, which way to hand. I love him because he said, quote, "The Big Dig is the biggest benefit overrun in the history of American transportation." How can I not with that kind of a quote? Anyway, public transportation has seen very good days in Boston. It's seen very bad days. It came back from the near dead, and now it's seeing bad days again, and I think it's going to come back. But let me go back a little bit in history. In the mid-1800s, in Boston, even more than in other American cities, and even more than most European cities, public transportation became an instrument for creating an accessible metropolitan region, something the world hadn't seen before. Just to talk parochially, in Massachusetts, there was a time when the highest per capita income in the world was in New Bedford. Not too many people associate New Bedford today with the highest per capita income in the world. There was another period in our history when Lawrence had the highest per capita income in the United States. Another place that doesn't exactly have the highest per capita income. One of the characteristics of these basically what became company towns is they were very specialized, they were very good at what they did, they were very profitable both for the companies and the workers were getting decent pay and growing. But when something happened in those industries, people were stuck. The workers were stranded, there weren't other opportunities. Companies moved to the south where they could get cheaper labor. But in Boston, what developed was an accessible region where if one industry started to phase out, there were other industries that take its place. Workers who might lose their job because of new technology in one set of industries could take what was the predecessor to the T to other job opportunities. So the accessible region provided opportunity for workers and for companies to access labor. And I don't know how old the term is, but you've all heard the term agglomeration benefits. Agglomeration benefits are the benefits that accrue from dense populations where employers have access to a variety of employees. Jim mentioned it's not really healthy to be sitting in your living room playing Zoom all day. You're better off interacting with other people. It's also not productive. Most enterprises require a mix of skills. It requires different kinds of people to participate to really produce good products. And people grow and change over time. They're not always 25 years old and a whiz at a particular technology. But in an agglomeration-based metropolitan area, the productivity of enterprises is higher. That higher productivity means more profits, more jobs, and more equity. And transit is key to that because that's how people get around. Boston in particular is where this began. The horse-drawn street railways, which characterized the 1870s and 1880s, had a very large number of small competing companies, street by street, such and such street railway. One company amalgamated all of those companies into a monopoly. Monopoly is usually thought of as a bad word. They monopolized, they electrified. It wouldn't make any sense to have a different electric power plant for every street railway. But if you agglomerated everybody together, you could have electric power, substitute electric powered streetcars for the horses, and introduce for the customers the 5-cent fare, and you could go everywhere. You didn't have to pay again every time you got onto a different street railway. So in this bad word monopoly, you got something that provided a big benefit to consumers in terms of accessibility. This model was succeeding and the economy was doing really well. It was hit very hard during World War I when there was a shortage of labor. Now, because of a president named Wilson, who had some of the proclivities of former President Trump, he never wanted to admit that there was an influenza epidemic in Boston that wiped out more people than World War I did. So the labor force was really hit hard by workers disappearing, and both because of the war and because of the pandemic, and the new competition from the automobile. So transit became less of a driver than it had been. It was really transit that built that early period of prosperity. South Station was the busiest rail passenger terminal in the United States. North Station was the second busiest rail terminal in the United States. Grand Central Station was the third busiest. That gives you a sense of how dense Boston was and how transit-oriented it was. Fast forward to the post-war period, the business leaders began to see rescuing the MBTA and reestablishing it as a regional reliable service as key to turning around the economy of Boston and allowing it to grow. Very strange people led that effort. There's a guy named Jenny, who was chairman of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. He made his money, the Jenny family had been in the whale oil business. They shifted into petroleum. Some of you have a few gray hairs, you may remember the Jenny gas stations we used to have over here. This guy who made his money selling gasoline financed a propaganda campaign to say, if we don't get public transportation, we're going to be in gridlock and our economy's going to hell. This is a guy making money out of selling gasoline, and he's going to John Volpe became a big boost. His daughter was a road builder. He was Secretary of Transportation in the United States. He was a big promoter of public transportation. There's a fellow on the South Shore who made Buicks, who sold Buicks. He became the leader in advocating for the restoration of the old colony rail system. I said to him, he's a Republican. I said, you're a Republican. You sell Buicks. How come you're a big advocate for putting commuter rail back? He said, well, John Volpe said to me, you dumb son of a bitch, look at the congestion out there. You're never going to sell another Buick. We're going to do something about that congestion. So these odd bedfellows were key, and there was real leadership in the business community. But that's when the economy was more local. And the First National Bank was a very big supporter of public transportation. Now they've all gotten nationalized. The leaders in those organizations are looking for their next promotion in some other city. There's nothing like the commitment to this city that was once there. So we have to reinvent ways of developing that political will. We were lucky. I'm talking too long. I'm going to get questions. I had great fortune working for Mike Dukakis. He was a great boss and a huge supporter of public transportation. Also very lucky to follow Governor Sargent and Alan Altshuler, who was an MIT political science professor, the first Secretary of Transportation. They made the tough decision to not accept federal highway money to build destructive highways through the middle of the city and to succeed in getting legislation so that money could be shifted into public transportation. So when I came back into the government with Governor Dukakis in 1975, we were the beneficiaries of these terrific decisions that have been made to stabilize the MBTA and invest in it by a set of business leaders and by the prior administration of Sargent and Altshuler. And we did do surveys of customer satisfaction in and about 1978, I think is the first one we ran. Customer satisfaction on the T was 50%. We did the same survey year on year. It kept going up and up and up. And again, when Tom Glenn left in 1991, customer satisfaction was at 92%. So it can be done. It takes consistent support for investment. But another thing about the unique nature of Boston, every city, every big metropolitan area you go to has, baseball teams, basketball teams, hockey teams, great universities, important museums, the Opera House, financial center, an airport. In every other metropolitan area you can think of, those assets are 10 and 15 miles apart from each other. In Boston, if you hold your breath under the Sumner Tunnel, you could walk from every one of those assets to the others. We have the most concentrated economy. All of our eggs are in one basket, very concentrated, and you could walk it. It's absolutely dependent on transit. It's also absolutely dependent on eliminating gridlock, which was the reason we pursued the Big Dig. I was offended at how ugly the thing was and the way it cut the Italian community off from the rest of the city when the North End used to be an Italian community. But from a transportation point of view, the gridlock was killing the city. And the combination of putting the artery underground and wider and putting the Ted Williams Tunnel to route traffic over to the airport, not through the middle of the city, that effectively doubled the roadway capacity so that you could have mobility in the system. But the success of the Big Dig was absolutely dependent on continuing to invest in public transportation. It was embedded in all of our environmental approvals. The Green Line was supposed to be extended by roughly 2010. The Blue to Red Connector was supposed to happen by 2010. So none of that happened. People after Dukakis just didn't give a damn. And we had a great business leader, Leventhal, Norm Leventhal, also an MIT graduate, who provided tremendous support to the artery in getting it launched, but also changed the name of this organization, the Artery Business Committee, to a Better City. It's still the same ABC acronym, to advocate for getting back on the ball with public transportation. So, to try to be a little optimistic, ABC is a viable organization providing business community support, again, to resuscitating the T. We've got a governor that cares. We've got Tom Glenn back as chairman. So I'm hopeful that, that we can pull this off and have a kind of equitable and sustainable, environmentally sustainable and socially sustainable metropolitan area that we need going into the future. I got a thought on another big project, but I'll hold that.
I really appreciate the dose of positive energy that Fred is introducing to the possibility of T there. And I'm still digesting so much, there's so many interesting points there. Maybe I'll pick two of them and pose a question to Jim here, right? First of all, if you pay attention to what Jim wears, can you explain what this is?
I have a lot of transit.
Oh, you have the-
Well, I'm on this thing. I should also put it on. So I'm on the board of an advocacy group locally called Transit Matters. You may have heard of us. Thank you. This says connect the red and blue line. Yes. It's off. There you go. There we go. You know, the point of this is not, people call it an expansion. Some people call it an expansion project. I call it a completion project because they're the only two parts of the subway system that actually don't connect, right? And connectivity is a very big issue for me. Right? If you think about, there just might be some folks who work in Kendall Square who want to have a flight to Logan and who would take the blue to red in order to get there. But they would not be totally in their right mind today if they thought they should take the red line to the silver line through the Ted Williams Tunnel, right? We're not thinking about how that could help modestly cause some mode shift, decrease emissions, decrease traffic congestion. We're not thinking about the single mother in East Boston who has a kid who needs to get, a sick kid needs to get to the doctor at Mass General, and it's raining like today, and she's got to walk from Bowdoin to Mass General. You say, well, what's the big deal? That's a big deal for her, as it would be a big deal for the person, you know, using a cane, who's also coming to East Boston. There's an equity considerations, there are mode shift considerations, and now that if you've been on Cambridge Street, you see that Mass General is actually in the ground building a new facility there. They wanted a portal into the facility from a connector. Now's the time to do this. Right? Now's the time to do this. So we keep pushing this sort of thing. I want to say really quickly, I'm not as optimistic. I'm a pessimist by nature, but it's served me well because everything good that happens is all upside, and I'm very rarely disappointed. We had a decade of disinvestment. We've had many decades of disinvestment, but when Fred left in 1991, you may remember, those of you who were here, there was a slogan called Tame the Beast. And the beast was the T. That was the Weld administration's transportation leadership's slogan, Tame the Beast. And they wanted to tame the beast by starving it. And they did a good job with that. There was also another narrative. It's funny how these narratives get hold of people's imaginations. The second narrative was budget buster. Oh, the state has several budget busters. The T was named as a budget buster. And it was a Democratic legislature that in the year 2000 decided it was going to change the way the T was funded and deploy an initiative called forward funding, which I'll just cut to the chase, said we're going to give the T all this money from the sales tax and that'll solve everything. And of course it didn't, because all the projections of what sales tax revenue were going to be were way off. And so now we're stuck in a very interesting moment with a progressive mayor of Boston who pushed and pushed and pushed and got a 2-year pilot for a free bus program for 3 bus routes. That pilot ends in March, which means the T needs to decide this fall, and if you're taking my class, I see this one person here who is, assignment 2 involves advising the mayor on what to do, right? Are you gonna, because she's got a board appointment now, do you keep the pilot, make it permanent? If you do that, should you expand it? If you don't expand it, why wouldn't you expand it? Why would you treat those riders differently than, say, low-income riders coming from East Boston or Chelsea, right? If you do one or both of those things, who's going to pay for the differential? In Merrimack Valley, the head of the Merrimack Valley Transit Authority has proven that you can have free bus, because he made the whole thing free, and a better workforce, right, at the regional level. My point in saying this is there's this, again, confluence happening in the moment where fares are down. They're not coming back anytime soon to 100%, both because of pandemic effects and people working from home, and frankly, because the T service is so bad, it's suppressing ridership. I mean, Fred talked about a walking city, thankfully, because it's mode shifting me to walking half the time. And that's not how mode shift is supposed to work. So, my larger point is we're facing an interesting moment over the next year, how the T is going to navigate hitting the fiscal cliff, responding to the free bus pilot, and thinking about fare policy as an integral part of how you rebuild an MBTA equity. And I encourage you all to participate in the conversation. And it shouldn't mean that we can't do projects like the Red Blue Connector, which pale in comparison to the Big Dig. I'll end on this note. I've been trying to write this for Commonwealth Magazine. And we need to have a governor right now, in this moment, who embarks upon a 10-year program of reinvesting in the T, spending more money on transit and rail over the next decade than we spend on highways and bridges in Metro Boston. I'm not saying spend less on highways and bridges. I'm saying spend more on transit and rail. Just like we built the Quabbin Reservoir in 10 years, just like we cleaned the harbor in 10 years, right? We did the Big Dig in 10 years. We should be able to rebuild and reimagine the Metro Boston transit and rail system in the next 10 years, but it will take a commitment level of energy resources that mimics what we did with the MWRA, with Quabbin, and with, frankly, rebuilding, passing over means and methods. We took Logan Airport from a rinky-dink airport in 1959. By the beginning of the 1970s, it was the 8th busiest in the world. How did we do that? Right? We can do something in a 10-year period if you want to. Let's get it right this time.
Yeah. So a couple things from first talk and connect to what actually several things project Jim's doing, right? One thing, or you mentioned a couple of important benefits that transit brings in, access, socially coherent, decarbonization of the things. And Jim, you're actually just starting a project titled as a public transit as public good, right? To really systematically defend the value of public transit, right? That's one. That's the justification. But then in terms of finance, you also have talked about the mechanism. How do we get the money, right? As part of the Transit Resource Consortium, we also organize this CFO, Chief Financial Officer seminar, right? So what do you learn from that seminar? What's the possible solution to fund the transit place, right? Maybe last before you, like both of you answer that question. So how do we really bring resources to MBTA? Right? Just give you an example. My friend and I, we work with Transport for London. We're actually looking at how do they justify their Jubilee line, and how do they justify their crossing. It's a major transit project that happened in London. Right? The Jubilee line connect London, the downtown area, with Canary Wharf. That's where all the financial district, UCBD, right? The banks, the insurance companies. Right? I think the British people did something really amazing. They convinced the banks, the insurance company, to pay for it. Right? So think about here in Kennel Square, right? In Kennel Square, how many we all probably coming from Kennel Square here? Who ultimately benefit from this? It's the Googles, Microsoft, Novartis. Is their employee using this? Right? Is it possible to convince those group of people to put finance into it, together with the fare box, together with the public financing, to really have a multi-party, multi-stakeholder support of this? Right? We'll start with Egypt and then.
So just to pick up on the funding issue, so Bhuvan and I just led if you go on the MIT Mobility Initiative website, you'll see on the landing page a link to the report we finished about a month or so, where we addressed an issue which politically people don't want to talk about, which is, as we're pushing for an EV transition where everyone's going to drive an EV, I aspire to own one, I'm not against that. The dirty little secret people don't want to talk about is what happens to the gas tax. Oops, it's zero when we're all driving an EV. In Massachusetts, that's $900 million a year you got to find. So, part one. Part two, New York, ahead of the game, what are they doing? They're introducing cordon pricing. They call it congestion pricing. It's really cordon pricing as a way to reduce congestion and also as a way to fund their transit needs, right? Just they're doing what London is doing, what Stockholm does, what Singapore does. What I predict is going to happen, those of us who are transit advocates, need to engage in the moment. We're going to be faced sooner than later with the need to reinvent how we fund our transportation system, both on the highway side and the transit side. So I say, let's collaborate, let's figure it out, so that the highway lobby doesn't run over the transit advocates. Notice how I used highway lobby, transit advocates. I know a narrative when I see one. And that we can think about how to have a fair and sustainable funding system post-gas tax, because it's coming, folks, right? Washington Post just today had a column, an article about, have we reached the inflection point yet on EVs? I don't think we have. But it's an interesting article about when that inflection point occurs, where on sort of an S-curve adoption chart, you would see that it goes up. In California, 25% EVs now, I think, in terms of people purchasing things. So it's beginning to happen. We need to have a principled, effective, politically acceptable approach to funding transit and replacing the gas tax. If those conversations don't happen collaboratively, they will happen in an antagonistic way. That's not good for transit. And we all need to be thinking about how to leverage that now before it's too late.
I agree with almost everything Jim said, except I have a difference on timing. Let me tell you a story about when I was a little kid. And I love spinach. My mother likes spinach. And I'd go to the movies and see the Popeye movie, and he ate spinach and he was strong. And his nephews would say, spinach, he wouldn't eat it. And I said, I don't understand. You know, spinach is great, I love it. How many little kids don't like it? But one day, now we lived in a kind of a bubble of Italo-Americans, all of who worked in construction and came from the same couple of villages, Antonio's village and my parents' village, near each other. So we're in this kind of bubble, but right next door there were Irish people. They were good friends. So one day I ate at my friend's house, and his mother made spinach. It was awful. I looked at my mother and I said, wow, Mrs. Cusic's such a nice lady. I love being in the house, but the spinach was awful. What's the matter? What do you do? He says, well, first, I wash the spinach. You gotta wash it a lot because it's crinkly and all the sand stays in it, so you wash it real good. Then you get some olive oil, and you fry a little bit of garlic, and you saute it, and it tastes good. So if you want people to eat spinach, you're gonna make it taste good. So if you start the conversation by saying, you're gonna have to pay, you turn off a bunch of people. Dukakis, who was tremendously supportive of transit and was just a great boss to work for, we raised the gas tax enough to really fund things, to handle the local match requirement, to go big enough to fund the $400 million a year statewide bridge and road program. It was really well funded. We didn't do that in 1975. We did that in 1988 after Jim O'Leary, a really great general manager that we had moved the effectiveness of the MBTA from that lousy 50% acceptability. It was up into the 80s. Then people, if you tell people you got to pay for the system that's late and makes you angry every day, it's kind of a hard sell. So I think there's a timing thing of when you go for the money. We're very lucky here in Massachusetts. Something that was called the millionaire's tax, also called the fair share tax, passed a citizen referendum with the opposition of a lot of the business community, God damn their souls. They know that you can't have a successful economy without better education, without better transportation, and they were so self-seeking, they opposed the millionaire's tax because they want someone else to pay for everything. Fortunately, it passed. There's enough money in that tax, in combination with the money that Biden got from the Congress, to do a lot of big improvements before we need to talk about a new funding mechanism. Now, in the rest of the country, they don't have that luxury. They don't have the millionaire's tax. They do have access to the Biden money, but you need operating subsidy money to run public transportation. And as Jim said, if you're only carrying 70% of the fares, you've got a hole in your budget, you've got to make it up somehow. We're lucky. We can deal with it in the short term to make enough progress. To go to both Jim and Jinhua's comment about a big 10-year program to be built, let me mention a couple of ideas that I stole from Antonio. Antonio did a proposal in the 1980s saying, we got a north station, we got a south station, why don't we have a west station? And that concept is the center of the proposal that I'm very hopeful is going to happen to rebuild the turnpike in the Alston section, flat on the ground so it'll cost less to build and cost less to maintain, and can be bridged over to reconnect the Alston community that was severed by both rail and roadways back in the 60s and before. So we can make a major improvement in equity, but by introducing the West Station and providing not just the service that goes to South Station, but providing a service on the Grand Junction tracks in back of MIT, so that you could transfer from Worcester or Framingham at West Station and get to Kendall Square. In the opposite direction, you could have a one-seat ride from Salem right to Kendall Square if this thing is done right. So there's huge opportunity in Alston to do a multimodal project, repairing a highway that's literally beyond its useful life and very dysfunctional, make it more functional and build it around transit. Institute East-West Rail, inland route service. The Acela service to New York is nice, but it faces lots of competition from commuter rail services. It's only 6 miles longer to get to New York by going Boston, Framingham, Worcester, Springfield, Hartford, New Haven, and you're in Manhattan. Amtrak instituted one-seat ride from Springfield to Manhattan this year. table is set to really develop something that will provide statewide benefits. We need, you can't, I love Boston, I'm very parochial, I've lived here all my life. We can't expect Springfield to be paying our bills. There's got to be some benefit for Worcester and Springfield. So I think the East-West so-called inland route service is one major initiative connected to the Grand Junction and connected to what Jim and others have been calling the equity corridor to get commuter rail service serving Everett, Chelsea, Revere, and Lynn, both to the Grand Junction but also to North Station. So converting the commuter rail system to a regional rail system with affordable fares and frequency can simultaneously improve the equity and improve the economy and improve the environment. And that's doable. The rail, we're very lucky. We have more rail because of the legacy of the 1800s. We have a radial rail network that only a few cities, Chicago's got a decent network, Philadelphia does, New York does, but we're very lucky to have that system. It's grossly underutilized. So to substantially revise commuter rail to regional rail, that's that decade-long, big size project. But it's got to begin with the inland route, Worcester, Springfield, Grand Junction, and benefits to Chelsea, Everett, and Revere. And as a building block. The other Antonio idea that I want to steal is if you look at an aerial photograph of the Boston metropolitan area, there's a big wasteland on the edge of the Mystic River that's now got the LNG terminal, the casino. I don't know if the casino's better or worse than pretty cleaned up little piece of the waterfront. But that's really the heart of the region. That's a place where high-density housing can be added and industry to support a continuation of the kind of concentrated economy that's been our best asset. And it's too important to not get it done. So I'm optimistic that the tools are there, and I agree that we are going to need to deal with that $900 million. But I don't think people are buying electric vehicles that fast. It's not this week's problem. It's a problem for a decade from now. So every problem in its time. When you put a little olive oil over the
Megan, do you have time for any questions at all?
Yes, we do. We have time.
Yeah, let's get some questions here.
Well, I think this started in my mind more than 10 years ago. It's a lot of it is messaging, and I cry when I just don't think that most of the people that I interact with value what we see. When I go to Aloisi, and I've been back in the Boston area for almost 10 years now, and it's been under construction now for a time. And I watched it when I was a student at MIT be built, and now it's a crumbling wreck. The new fare system is years and years behind New York, even though we picked the same system that they have. I live in Waltham, and we should have had the Red Line extension all the way down Route 2, but it never happened. How do we get people to understand? And I loved all of the things that you guys said, but we've got to change minds here that this matters, and so many people just don't want to spend a dime on anything right now. I don't expect you to have the answers, but it's been weighing on me, where are the priorities? And we used to think we needed to pay for things.
Thank you. Jim,
Well, I agree. As I said earlier, the reason why I spent a fair amount of my time volunteering as a board member of Transit Matters is because transit matters, right? There is a bit of a generational movement going on. This will shock you. I'm the oldest person on Transit Matters. There's a lot of enthusiasm among younger people in this area for transit, and also for safe cycling and walking. I mean, I think that there is just a generational adherence to looking at access and looking at multimodal transportation systems different. Number one. Number two, I think I've come to the view that we have to begin to do what people did back in the 1970s. I'd like to see a crowd of people in front of the State House with the parish priest, or the local rabbi, whoever it is, demanding action on transit. It's the same spirit that people like Fred actually helped lead, that said, we're not going to have an inner belt back in the 1960s and 70s. We're not going to have any more airport expansion at the expense of the East Boston community. We're not going to have, and what came of that is, the Southwest Corridor Park and an Orange Line extension that didn't divide the communities, and ultimately a Central Artery Tunnel project that attempted to improve a really awful transportation network without taking a single home by adding acres and acres of parkland. We need that same spirit of people demanding change. I suspect we're going to get it, but it takes work, it takes effort. And I do, just to circle back, I just worry a little bit that technology, which is a huge blessing of our time, for any number of reasons, is also a little bit of a curse in the sense that it may enable too many people to avoid participating in that way, right? That it's a lot, putting something on Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days, is a lot different than showing up and standing in front of the State House and demanding action as a full participant in this society. And so I'm hopeful that will happen. The older I get, I think the more radical I get in these ideas. And I feel good about it.
Two comments I made. One thing, the Fitchburg Bridge was right through Waltham Center. That should be cheap and frequent. And you have really good access into the city, and you can transfer them to the Red Line at Porter Square. Doesn't cure the common cold, but it's a nice building. But the other thing is we're talking about physical infrastructure. But we also have to pay attention to the human infrastructure. When Mike Dukakis was governor, there was a meeting periodically where every agency would nominate employees for recognition for doing a good job. There was a lunch given to the whole administration, all of the winners of that process. He called them Manny Cavallo Awards. They were named for Manny Cavallo, who was a really great visionary human service secretary, who focused on building the human infrastructure. People have to feel pride in what they're doing. After literally decades of Dukakis's encouraging, the pay was lousy. The people working at the T when Dukakis was governor could have walked across the street, got a job in the private sector, and doubled or tripled their pay. They stayed at the T because they were getting to work on stuff they loved. When Weld came in, funny guy in some ways, the first meeting he had with the MBTA leadership, they had proposed, we had filed a bond bill that included a couple of $1 million for further transit improvements. Weld said, I'm zeroing up. I'm not spending a penny on the T. I'm not Mike Dukakis. With a big salami and 6'3" and redheaded. We know you're not Mike Dukakis. What's that going to do? He made that what he thought was a joke. Peter McNulty, one of the best construction managers we had in the public sector, quit the next day. He drove people out because who wants to hang around to be, and the term that he used, walruses. Public employees are big, fat, sloppy, disgusting creatures who burp a lot. I'm working for the team making half the money I could make, and I'm gonna be insulted by the government. You know, it's not just about money, it's about employees who are dedicated and inspired to do things, and I'm hopeful that we're gonna see that with Tom Glenn. I don't know if he'll land as well, with Governor Healy. That human infrastructure's gotta be rebuilt. If we're gonna succeed, people have to feel good about what they're doing.
Some other questions on the floor?
I think it's
I can probably speak loudly. You brought up the issue about the commuter rail lines still being run on diesel trains. 20 years ago, our tracks were electrified. 20 years, the community has wanted electric trains because the lines are already there. You seem to know why we're not getting electric trains. I don't need to be sure.
Can we collect a few more? Yes, so there's 3 questions. Can I all them and then move on? Yeah.
So Jim talked about reimagining the T for 10 years out. So tell us, Jim and Fred, if you could just wave a wand and say, here's what we're going to do in 10 years, how would you reimagine it?
Yeah, that's the last question. Okay.
So my question is about onions and olive oil. The olive oil. We didn't build the north-south rail connector, but can we then use the Y at the South Bay to get out to this west station and use the Grand Junction to connect to North Station and go on north so that we get a connected commuter rail system and Amtrak system from the south up to the north and the west? That's the olive oil, to smooth that connectivity. The onions. If you go west from Alston out to Worcester and Springfield, a lot of curves of the onions out there. It's a slow road. What's it going to take to sweeten up those onions between here and Springfield so that the time will be competitive? Not just the mileage, but the time competitive between Boston and New York with the inland route. Onions and olive oil.
I got dinner, so you made me hungry. So to all the questions, I guess, in terms of the regional rail, which in Transit Matters lingo, when we say regional rail, we mean a fully electrified rail system. Right now, unfortunately, you know, the Providence line, because Amtrak runs electric locomotives, it's like there for the asking. The T would not have to make a major investment other than buying the equipment in making that electric, right? We have supported the purchase of what's called EMUs, or electric multiple units, as the best solution, as opposed to electric locomotives. Electric multiple units, really quickly, one of the metrics that you use to assess locomotive performance is mean distance between failures, right? Electric multiple units beat diesel locomotives by a factor of like 400x. It's incredible. And so they are a really good investment because they cost less to maintain, they have much fewer mean distance between failures, they will enable the T to provide more frequent and more reliable service. The T has been, and you see this in their decision on trolley electric bus, which they have abandoned, a proven technology. The T has a historic and persistent antagonism toward catenary. I don't know why. There's nothing wrong with catenary. They just have an antagonism toward it. And that antagonism has been manifested by this decision to eliminate trolley electric bus, and it manifests itself by a slow walking and a reluctance to engage fully the electrification of the rail conversation. If you electrify the rail, if you also add high-level platforms at stations that don't have them, and you do a few other things, you can have that east-west rail that functions a lot more efficiently and in a lot more speedy way than what we have today. So 10 years out, just to circle back, what I would like to see 10 years out after this sort of visionary effort is an electrified regional, now I don't think you can electrify the whole system in 10 years, that's a big lift, but well on our way to completing electrifying the regional rail system, having frequent, thinking about the assets that we call commuter rail assets differently, so that you were running Innercore, Lynn, Fairmount line up to Boston Landing, Riverside. You were running that with like frequent subway-like services. I know there's an irony in that because frequent subway frequencies these days is another matter, and I use the red line, so I'm very in tune to that. But you know what I'm saying. We would have that. We would have east-west rail, that inland route that Fred talked about. We would have the red to blue lines connected. We would have new trains in, and I would not be waiting and waiting and waiting for them. It's that vision. And then we would have, finally, a workforce that was proud to be a workforce entity, that was encouraged to learn technologies and adopt them and engage them, right? That where the idea that this would be your job for life gave way to the idea that this would be a great platform for a future job, maybe in a different sector. That we would think about the T differently, but that we would also fully understand how significant the T is in our daily lives for economic reasons, for social cohesion reasons, for the overall health, I think, of the area. And if we could do that in 10 years, we've done something really incredible. In that sense, I am optimistic, because I do sense a younger generation not willing to accept the lethargy, the inertia of the past, and not willing to also watch political leaders, frankly, say the same old things and not do. We can't have, in my judgment, an environment anymore where we think that the finite streetscape in our urban areas somehow is entirely dedicated to the pleasure of automobiles. Bicyclists pay taxes too. We should take this, anyone took Fred's course or my course, we can read about the tragedy of the commons. Part of this is using a finite asset here. That's what the streetscape is. And it's about time we start thinking about the streetscape as a manifestation of the kind of world that we want to live in, that we want to build in the 21st century. And it really ought to look different than the world that was built 100 years ago, right? That's what we hope to do, and I frankly appreciate the opportunity that MIT offers through the mobility initiative to forum like this, where we can work with people using experience, data, knowledge to maybe shift the narrative in the right direction.
Thanks, Jim. All good comments. Let me make a couple of comments on onions. Totally agree on getting the Grand Junction connected, so at least 2/3 of the circle will be complete and have really good connectivity. There's a technical solution to the problem of curbs that doesn't involve taking a lot of property. There's a till technology that the Spanish use called the talvo. The Italians have something called pendicino, I think it is, or pendolino, something like that. It tilts. It's not that a fast train will fly off the track. It's that the passenger will get sick to their stomach, their Coca-Cola will spill. But if the car adjusts to the curve, you don't feel those forces, so you can go very fast. On the existing, the track has to be better, it can't be, but you don't have to rebuild the whole track. We proposed that the Amtrak when this was covered in 1989. And there was odd for me to say something good about Republicans. The Bush administration had for some strange reason, a very good Federal Railway administrator. Blanket on his name, but he was quite good. I heard him give a speech, and he was talking about how he was going to get the Secretary of Transportation to come with him to Europe to see what the Swedes were doing and what the Germans were doing, because there was this and there was that. And I went up to him afterwards, I said, I love the speech, but when you say the Germans are doing this or the Swedes do that, people say, oh yeah, the Swedes, the Germans. You're going to take them to Spain and Italy. Americans are not going to be able to stand it if you tell them that Spaniards and Italians are making us sick. And the tugboat technology was invented in the United States and adopted by the Spaniards. So there are ways of using technology to solve some of these. You got to have an open mind to trying different kinds of vehicles to deal with the problems you have. Another piece of onion. What no one's paying attention to, I believe, is that the electric vehicle is going to be very expensive. People aren't going to be able to afford the number of vehicles in the household that they now have. If we had a reliable transit system, then they're all going to change day one. But as people come to trust the service, they will make choices to have less automobile. They're not going to go car-free. But they'll have one car in the household instead of two, or two instead of three. And you don't tell people we're glad that you're suffering with high prices. The fact is the electric vehicle is going to cost. Converting the electrical system to green energy, that's going to cost a lot of money. So transit is a way of mitigating that cost. And on the bicycle side, I almost got hit by a bicycle crossing the street. Bicycles are an acquired taste. But I used to use a bike when I was a student because there's tremendous convenience. But to rely on a bike exclusively when we have weather like we're having today, it's crazy. You need a good, reliable public transportation system. And then you have the option of using the bike when the weather's good, because it is a very convenient way to go if you're young and don't have big problems. But it really needs to be coupled. To me, the basic building block is a more reliable team, and that can make the bicycle choice a more reasonable one. In addition to infrastructure, one of the great things about the Austin project is we've got the potential to take the Paul W. White path, which was the first significant bicycle path in the area, named for a doctor who popularized the idea of bicycling as being good for your heart. That can become much better through that project. Right now, if you're trying to use a bike, as you go by BU, you come to the big abutment of the BU bridge, you have to go around that abutment. There's a blind corner, and there's a bike coming the other way, and a jogger, and a pedestrian. It's a real dangerous spot. That can be cleaned up, made wider, allow the pedestrians and joggers and the bikes to be on separate paths. And you can, if you know the geography of the turnpike, there's dead space between the turnpike and Lincoln Street. You can put a bike path into that. It will get you all the way from basically the IHOP, if you know where that is. There'll be a bike path that will get you all the way through Ralston, across an Aganis connector, onto the Paul W. White. And you get all the way to Boston without encountering a traffic light. It's like a bike highway. It still would be no good during the snow, but it would be a nice asset to attract people using bikes for casting.
Good, so listening to Jim and Fred, I do feel much more positive about the T's future than I came in. Right? Hopefully you had the similar impression of tonight, right? So transit can be successful internationally, historically, and hopefully in Boston in 10 years. Please join me in thanking Jim and Fred.
Well, I'd like to thank our speakers. This was really fascinating. I live in Somerville, so I have the experience of walking, biking, and occasionally driving, and I'm eternally grateful for the Green Line extension. It's great. I managed to take the green line to the blue line to Logan in about 30 minutes last week. It was amazing. My flight was delayed, but that's how it goes. We'll talk about airplanes in another session. So we do have the room for a few more minutes if people want to hang around, chat, maybe ask some more questions. And I do have some thank you gifts for our speakers.